The man who never slept. There was a man in a small town who never slept. At least, that's what people said. No one had ever seen him yawn, rub his eyes, or even look tired. His name was Leonard Graves, and he lived alone in an old Victorian house at the end of Willow Street. Leonard wasn't a hermit, went to the grocery store, attended church on Sundays, and even had polite conversations with his neighbors. But no matter what time of night you passed by his house, you could always see the glow of a single lamp in his study. Some people swore they had seen him sitting at his desk at 3, 4, even 5 in the morning, staring at the same page of a book, unmoving. Rumors spread. Some claimed he was an insomniac, others whispered darker theories. Was he a vampire, a ghost, or something worse? The Watcher in the Night, Daniel Carter, a local journalist, had always dismissed these stories as superstition. But as his curiosity grew, he decided to investigate. One cold autumn night, he parked across the street from Leonard's house, determined to see for himself whether the man ever slept. The hours dragged on. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2. The house remained still, but the light in the study never went out. Just when Daniel was about to give up, something happened. At exactly 3:15 a.m., Leonard's front door creaked open. Daniel held his breath as Leonard stepped outside and looked up at the sky. The moon was full, casting eerie shadows across the yard. Leonard stood motionless, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then, something unnatural occurred. His shadow did not move. It wasn't a trick of the light. The trees swayed, the wind rustled through the leaves, but Leonard's shadow remained frozen, disconnected from his body. Then, slowly, it began to shift. Not following his movements, but twisting on its own, stretching toward the street. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. He reached for his camera, but his fingers trembled too much to take a picture. Leonard tilted his head, as if sensing he was being watched. His shadow twitched unnaturally, elongating across the pavement like grasping fingers. Panic surged through Daniel. He turned the key in the ignition and sped off, his tires screeching against the asphalt. The vanishing house. The next morning, Daniel returned to Willow Street, but something was wrong. Leonard's house was empty. The windows were dark, the front door slightly ajar. Inside, the air was thick with dust, as if no one had lived there for years. The furniture was still there, but covered in cobwebs. The clock on the wall had stopped at 3:15 a.m. He asked the neighbors about Leonard, but they only gave him puzzled looks. "Who?" one woman said. "No one's lived in that house for decades." "But I saw him," Daniel insisted. The woman frowned. "That house has been abandoned since the 80s. The last owner, well, they say he went mad. Kept talking about his shadow whispering to him. One night, he just disappeared. People say the house is cursed." Daniel felt his blood run cold. If Leonard Graves never existed, then who had he seen last night? The shadow that followed. That night, Daniel tried to convince himself it had been a dream, a trick of exhaustion. But as he lay in bed, something felt wrong. The air was too still, the shadows in his room too deep. Then, he saw it. His shadow was moving. Not shifting with the light, not reacting to his breathing. It was stretching, reaching up the walls like grasping fingers. A cold whisper filled the room. A voice just on the edge of hearing. "You watched me." Daniel couldn't move. His breath caught in his throat. The shadow loomed over him, dark and shapeless, filling the room with suffocating silence. The last thing he saw before the light flickered out was his own shadow pulling him into the darkness. And by morning, his apartment was empty. Just like Leonard's house,